Hubby filed for divorce not knowing I had sold my startup for $800,000. Then his perfect life crashed. I never thought the man I married would betray me so completely. But the day he handed me divorce papers, calling me financially incompetent, he had no idea I was about to sell my company for $1.2 million. And the best part? He was too busy running off with my assistant to notice. But trust me, he would soon regret everything. Because while he was planning his new life, I was planning his downfall. Want to know how I exposed them? How they lost everything while I walked away rich? Keep watching, because this story gets insane. I stared at the divorce papers on my desk, my fingers tightening around the edges as I read the words that officially ended my 10-year marriage. Due to my wife's financial irresponsibility and inability to contribute meaningfully to our household. The words cut deeper than I expected. My stomach twisted, my chest burned, but I refused to let the anger rise to the surface. I forced my breathing to slow, my grip to loosen. If Eric thought I would crumble at his carefully chosen words, he didn't know me at all. My name is Celestia Grant. I'm 38 years old, and I built my own cybersecurity company from the ground up, a company that was now in the final stages of being sold for $1.2 million. And yet, according to the man who once promised to love and cherish me, I was financially incompetent. The irony would have been laughable if it wasn't so infuriating. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples, trying to remember the last time Eric and I had actually been happy. It had to be years ago, back before his real estate firm took off, before he started seeing himself as some kind of self-made mogul, back when we still talked about our dreams, our future, our life together. But somewhere along the way, success had turned him into someone I didn't recognize, someone who looked at me with condescension instead of admiration, who dismissed my work as playing with computers while he bragged about his latest real estate deal over overpriced whiskey with his colleagues. I glanced through the glass walls of my office, my gaze landing on Stephanie, my assistant, sitting at her desk, giggling at something on her phone. Lately, she'd been taking longer lunches, dressing in clothes and jewelry that were far beyond her salary, and acting different, suspicious. I had chalked it up to a new boyfriend or maybe a side hustle, but now, as I stared at the diamond bracelet glittering on her wrist, one that looked eerily similar to the one Eric had bought me for our 5th anniversary, something inside me clicked into place. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. A notification from our acquisition team lit up the screen. The deal was nearly complete. Just a few more days, and the company I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into would be sold. I had kept the negotiations quiet, not out of secrecy, but because I knew better than to announce success before it was finalized. And now it seemed that decision had worked in my favor. Because if Eric had known I was about to come into 7 figures, he would have done everything in his power to get his hands on it. The office door creaked open. Celestia. Stephanie's voice was light, casual, but I didn't miss the smug undertone. Eric called. He said he'll be sending someone to pick up his things this weekend. I took a slow breath before looking up. Thank you, Stephanie, I said evenly. She smiled. That same fake, syrupy smile she'd been giving me for months. Of course, she chirped before turning on her heels and walking away. As she disappeared down the hall, I let out a breath and turned back to my laptop. The divorce papers sat next to me, waiting for my signature. Eric wanted a quick, clean break. No contesting, no fighting. Just a simple end to a marriage he had already moved on from. And why wouldn't he? He had his young, beautiful assistant, a growing real estate portfolio, and the satisfaction of believing he had left his financially incompetent wife behind. But little did he know, while he was busy planning his exit, I was securing my future. I clicked open the secure folder containing all of my company's legal documents, skimming through the final acquisition terms. The deal was airtight by keeping my negotiations private. I had ensured that Eric had no claim to my assets. Not a cent of my success would end up in his hands. He had no idea that the woman he was discarding so easily was about to walk away, not just free but wealthy. The thought sent a strange sense of calm through me. I picked up the pen, poised it over the divorce papers, and paused for just a second. This was it. The official end of what was once supposed to be forever. I thought about the early days of our marriage, the nights we stayed up talking about our dreams, the way he used to look at me with admiration instead of arrogance. But then I thought about the nights he came home late without explanation, the way he belittled my career, the way he had probably been sleeping with my assistant while I was working late at the office, building something real. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. 3 days later, I sat across from my attorneys in their sleek downtown Palo Alto office, finalizing both my divorce and the acquisition paperwork. The timing was almost poetic, signing away my failed marriage with one hand while securing my company's future with the other. Miss Grant, Barbara, my corporate attorney, pushed her glasses up her nose as she glanced at the documents in front of her. You understand that by not contesting the divorce and keeping the details of your acquisition confidential, Eric will have no claim to your business assets? I nodded, remembering the night 6 months ago when I first had the gut feeling that something was wrong. Eric had started working late more often. Stephanie had suddenly taken an interest in my company's valuation. I had hired a private investigator then, not out of jealousy, but to protect what was mine. The photos they provided of Eric and Stephanie's business lunches were almost secondary to my real concern, corporate espionage. I understand perfectly, I said, signing the last document with a steady hand. Eric made his choice. Barbara studied me for a moment before nodding. As I walked out of the office, a cool breeze swept through the streets of Palo Alto. I took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill my lungs. I was no longer someone's wife. I was no longer tied to a man who saw me as a liability instead of an equal. I was free, and soon I would be very, very rich. I pulled out my phone and opened a message from my VP of engineering. Stephanie had just submitted her resignation, effective immediately. Right on schedule. A slow smile spread across my face. Let the games begin. I sat in my car outside the office, gripping the steering wheel as I watched the city lights blur through the windshield. The ink on my divorce papers had barely dried, yet Eric was already acting like I had never existed, like the last 10 years of our marriage had been nothing more than a stepping stone to whatever shiny new life he was building with Stephanie. The thought should have made me furious, but instead a strange calm settled over me. Let him believe he had won. Let him think he had traded up. He had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I walked into my office, my heels clicking against the marble floor as I nodded at a few employees who were already at their desks. There was an energy in the air, an undercurrent of anticipation that had nothing to do with the usual hustle of running a company. The acquisition deal was days away from closing, and soon my bank account would reflect the years of work one had poured into this business. I had built something real, something worth millions. Eric, on the other hand, had built nothing but an illusion of power, and now he was betting everything on a woman whose loyalty had a price tag. I stepped into my office and locked the door before opening my laptop. A secure message from my lawyer popped up on the screen, confirming what I already knew. Eric had no legal claim to my business assets. He had signed the divorce papers without hesitation, eager to free himself from his financially incompetent wife. That phrase still clung to my mind, not because it hurt, but because it was so profoundly ironic. If he had bothered to look beyond his own ego, he would have realized that he had been married to a woman who was about to become a millionaire. But Eric had always been too focused on what was easy, what was immediate, never on what actually mattered. A sharp knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, already knowing who it was before I even looked up. Stephanie stepped inside, her usual smugness barely concealed under a mask of feigned professionalism. She was dressed in a new designer blouse, the kind that cost more than her monthly paycheck, and her manicured fingers toyed with the strap of her handbag as she gave me a rehearsed smile. "I just wanted to say goodbye," she said, her voice light, almost cheerful. "You've been a great boss, Celestia. Really." I tilted my head, watching her for a moment. She wasn't nervous. No, Stephanie was confident. She thought she had won. That was what made this moment so satisfying. I leaned back in my chair, lacing my fingers together. "Leaving so soon? I thought you might stick around a little longer." Her smile widened. "You know how it is. New opportunities, fresh starts." She hesitated just a fraction of a second before adding, "I'm sure you'll land on your feet." I almost laughed. She actually thought she was talking down to me. "Well," I said, closing my laptop and standing up, "best of luck." Stephanie gave a small nod, then turned and walked out, her designer heels clicking against the floor. I waited until I heard the elevator doors slide shut before I exhaled. That was the last time I would ever see her in this office, but it certainly wouldn't be the last time I heard her name. By lunch, the news had already spread. Stephanie had resigned, effective immediately. I watched from my office window as a few employees whispered amongst themselves, probably speculating about why she had left so suddenly. Some might have thought it was about the acquisition. Others might have guessed she had taken a job somewhere else. None of them knew the truth, but they would. Soon. Later that afternoon, I received another email, this time from Tyler, my head of accounting. He had just received a financial alert from one of his contacts at First Bay Bank. I opened the message and felt my pulse slow in satisfaction. Eric had just taken out a massive loan against his real estate holdings. I stared at the numbers, my mind instantly piecing it together. He was liquidating everything: his investments, his properties, his assets. Why? Because he believed he was on the verge of something big. And there was only one person who could have convinced him of that. Stephanie. A slow smile spread across my face as I took a sip of my coffee. They were so predictable. Eric had never been patient. He never wanted to build anything, never wanted to put in the work. He wanted shortcuts, easy money, and Stephanie had dangled one right in front of him. I didn't even need to guess what she had promised him. I already knew. She had spent 2 years in my company, sitting just outside my office, listening in on every conversation, watching as we developed our proprietary cybersecurity software, observing as investors showed interest. She had learned just enough to pretend she knew something valuable. And now, she had convinced Eric that she had insider knowledge of an exclusive investment opportunity that would make them rich overnight. I set my coffee cup down and pulled up my calendar. 3 days! That's all it would take. 3 days, and the acquisition deal would be finalized. 3 days, and I would be sitting on $1.2 million while Eric was sinking his last dime into a scam. 3 days, and I wouldn't have to do a damn thing but watch it all collapse around them. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for just a moment, letting the satisfaction settle in. They thought they had won. They had no idea they were about to lose everything. Eric thought he had it all figured out: his new relationship, his big investment, his fresh start without me. But what if I told you that his entire future was built on a lie? That while he was celebrating, his so-called insider knowledge was leading him straight into a trap? And that the woman he trusted was about to disappear with millions of stolen dollars? So tell me, who do you think will betray him first? Will it be Stephanie, the woman who sweet-talked him into this scam? Or will it be his own greed, finally catching up to him? Drop a 1 if you think Stephanie's about to run, or a 2 if you think Eric will destroy himself first. The days leading up to the acquisition felt like standing on the edge of a storm, watching the clouds gather, knowing that when it finally hit, everything would change. I kept my routine the same, came into the office at my usual time, attended meetings, reviewed final paperwork, but beneath the surface, there was an energy thrumming through me, an anticipation I could barely contain. Everything was falling into place. Stephanie was gone. Eric was betting everything on a scam, and I was about to close the biggest deal of my career. All I had to do was sit back and let it happen. On Wednesday morning, I was sipping my coffee when Tyler knocked on my office door, his expression unreadable. "You have a minute?" he asked. I gestured for him to come in. "What's up?" He sat down across from me, glancing at his phone before meeting my eyes. "I just got off the phone with a friend at First Bay Bank. Eric's loan was approved. He pulled nearly everything he had into that investment fund." I tilted my head, pretending to be mildly interested. "That was fast." "That's not the interesting part," Tyler said, lowering his voice. "Apparently, he didn't just invest his own money. He brought in other people. A lot of them. That got my attention." I set my coffee cup down. "How many?" "Dozens. Maybe more." Word spread fast in his little real estate circle. Some of them put in hundreds of thousands, some even more. Tyler exhaled, shaking his head. "They think they're getting in on something huge, Celestia. Some revolutionary AI-powered trading fund. Something that's supposedly using cutting-edge proprietary technology to generate insane returns." A sharp laugh slipped out before I could stop it. Of course. Stephanie had spun it that way. It wasn't enough for her to take Eric's money. She had leveraged his arrogance to pull in even more. She had taken bits and pieces of what she had overheard in my office and stitched together a fantasy so irresistible that Eric hadn't just fallen for it, he had sold it to others. "Jesus," I muttered, leaning back in my chair. Tyler studied me carefully. "Do you think he actually believes it?" I considered the question. Eric wasn't stupid. He was reckless, impulsive, greedy, but he wasn't stupid. Or at least, he hadn't been. But the thing about greed was that it blinded you. It made you hear what you wanted to hear, believe what you wanted to believe. And Stephanie had always been good at telling people exactly what they wanted to hear. I think," I said slowly, "he wants it to be true." Tyler nodded, but he still looked unsettled. "It's going to collapse, isn't it?" I picked up my coffee again, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. "Oh, absolutely," he hesitated. "Should we warn them?" I took a sip, savoring the bitterness. "Would they believe us?" Tyler didn't answer because we both knew the truth. The people who had thrown their money into this scheme weren't looking for logic. They weren't looking for facts. They were looking for an easy win, for a shortcut, for the secret that would make them rich overnight. They were looking for magic, and magic wasn't real. By the time I left the office that evening, the air outside was thick with the promise of rain. I walked to my car, the heels of my boots clicking against the pavement, my mind spinning through the pieces of this puzzle. Stephanie was running a classic con, but what was her endgame? Did she actually have a plan? Or was she just riding the wave, cashing out before it crashed? I slid into the driver's seat, pulling out my phone. A quick search brought up Eric's company website. There, right on the homepage, was a press release about their exclusive new investment opportunity. I clicked on it, my lips curling into a smirk as I skimmed the carefully crafted paragraphs. Proprietary AI technology, guaranteed high returns, limited spots available. It was practically a checklist of red flags. At the bottom of the page, a line caught my eye. Brought to you by industry insiders with years of experience in tech and finance. Years of experience. In tech. That was me. I let out a slow breath, my fingers tightening around the phone. Stephanie wasn't just using what she had overheard. She was using my name, or at least implying that she had some connection to my work, some insider knowledge that made this opportunity legitimate. My pulse quickened, not with anger, but with something sharper. This wasn't just a scam. It was a personal insult. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then exhaled, shaking my head. She had no idea what she had just done. I started the car, the low hum of the engine steady beneath me. Stephanie thought she was untouchable, that she could walk away from my company and steal my reputation to fund her little getaway. But she had made a mistake. She had left a paper trail. And when everything fell apart, there would be no one left to catch her when she ran. I sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop screen casting a soft light against the dim office. Outside, the city stretched endlessly, a maze of buildings and lights, but my focus was locked on the email in front of me. The subject line alone sent a slow pulse of satisfaction through me. Final stages of acquisition approval, all parties aligned. I exhaled, leaning back in my chair, letting the weight of it settle over me. In less than 48 hours, my company would be officially sold. Everything I had built, every sleepless night, every setback, every single moment of doubt, it was all about to pay off in the form of a 7-figure payout. The Celestia grant that Eric had written off as financially incompetent was about to walk away wealthy beyond his comprehension, and he had no idea. I glanced at my phone, scrolling through the notifications stacked up from earlier in the evening. Tyler had sent another message, updating me on Eric's latest moves. More investors, more money flowing in, more people falling for the lie. I clicked on the link he had attached, a local real estate forum where Eric was boasting about his exclusive investment fund. Trust me, this is the kind of opportunity people beg to get into. Limited spots left. If you're serious about building wealth, now is the time to act. I snorted. He sounded like a bad infomercial, but the comments below his post made my stomach twist. Names the first recognized people I had met at networking events. Business owners I had once respected had bought into it. They were thanking him for the opportunity, asking how they could wire funds, talking about pulling their retirement savings to get in early. God, they really believed him. I should have felt bad. I should have picked up the phone and warned them. But they wouldn't have listened. Because people like them, like Eric, like everyone chasing easy money, didn't want to hear the truth. They wanted to believe that they were special, that they were in on something big, something exclusive, something that would make them rich overnight. And people like Stephanie knew exactly how to sell that fantasy. The thought of her sent a slow burn through my veins. I pulled up her LinkedIn, my fingers tapping idly against my desk as I skimmed her page. She still hadn't updated her employment status, probably because she was too busy spending Eric's money. But I knew her type. She wouldn't stop at just him. She would bleed him dry, and the second she sensed the walls closing in, she'd disappear. I closed the tab and picked up my phone, dialing a number I hadn't used in months. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Didn't think I'd hear from you again, Marcus," my private investigator said, his voice laced with amusement. "Yeah, well," I murmured, spinning my pen between my fingers. "I need you to follow someone." There was a pause. "Same guy?" "No," I said. "His new girlfriend." Another pause, and then a low chuckle. "I was wondering when you'd get around to her." I let out a slow breath. "She's up to something. I need to know what it is before it blows up in my face." "Text me her details," Marcus said. "Give me 24 hours. I hung up and tossed my phone onto the desk, pressing my fingertips to my temples. I didn't know why I even cared. The second my deal closed, I could walk away from all of this. Eric, Stephanie, the whole damn mess. None of it would matter. I would be free. But something in my gut told me this wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning, I was in the middle of a meeting with my legal team when my phone vibrated. "Marcus." I let the call go to voicemail, forcing myself to stay focused. But as soon as we wrapped up, I was already dialing him back. "You're not gonna believe this," he said the second he answered. "Try me." "Your girl, Stephanie?" He let out a low whistle. "She's been very busy. Booked a first-class flight to Dubai 2 days from now. One-way ticket." A chill ran down my spine. "She's running. Looks like it. Oh, and here's the best part, she's moving money. Fast. Several offshore accounts. She's not planning on taking Eric with her." I gripped the edge of my desk, my pulse pounding in my ears. Of course. Of course. I had seen this coming. I had known it was inevitable. But hearing it out loud made my stomach drop. "How much has she pulled so far?" I asked. "At least 3 million, Marcus said. "Could be more, but that's what I've tracked so far." "Your ex?" He's about to be left holding the bag. I let out a breath, dragging a hand through my hair. 3 million! That meant she had conned even more investors than I thought. And once that money was gone, so was she. Eric wouldn't even see it coming. For the first time in weeks, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I sat there for a long moment, staring out the window, watching the city below as people rushed to jobs, to meetings, to lives that weren't about to explode into chaos. The smart thing to do would be nothing. Let it happen. Let Stephanie drain him. Let Eric realize too late that he had been played. Let the whole damn house of cards collapse on its own. But this wasn't just about him anymore. There were real people who had put their money into this scam, people who had no idea they were about to lose everything. And as much as I hated to admit it, I couldn't just sit back and watch them drown. I pulled up Tyler's number and hit call. "We need to talk," I said the second he picked up. "About what?" "About stopping this before it's too late." I sat in my office, my fingers tapping rhythmically against the desk as I stared at my phone. Marcus's words echoed in my head. Stephanie was running. She had siphoned at least $3 million into offshore accounts, booked a first-class flight to Dubai, and in less than 48 hours, she'd be gone, leaving Eric and every investor he had roped into this scam to deal with the fallout. I should have felt triumphant. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment Eric realized he wasn't the one pulling the strings. But all I felt was a deep, unsettling tension, like I was watching a car crash happen in slow motion. The problem was, that car wasn't just carrying Eric. It was packed with real people, investors who had trusted him, employees who had built their futures around what they believed was a legitimate opportunity, people who didn't deserve to have their lives burned to the ground because of his greed and Stephanie's deception. I picked up my phone and called Tyler. "We need to talk," I said the second he answered. "Jesus, Celestia, I was just about to call you," he said, his voice tense. "Eric just announced he's throwing a last-minute investor party tonight. Some fancy cocktail event at that private club downtown. He's trying to pull in even more money before the big launch." Of course he was. I closed my eyes and exhaled. He had no idea the walls were about to cave in. "Do we know how much he's raised so far?" I asked. Tyler hesitated. "If my estimates are right, north of $5 million, and counting. $5 million. I felt sick. I had known this was bad, but hearing the actual number made my stomach twist. That wasn't just Eric's money. That was retirement funds, college savings, people's entire life savings gone. I opened my laptop and pulled up Eric's investment website, scanning the names of the people who had already bought in. Some of them I recognized. Some of them I had sat across from at business dinners, had shaken hands with, had even called friends at some point, and I knew exactly how this was going to play out. The second the money disappeared, Eric would be the first one everyone blamed. And maybe that would have been fair, considering he had been stupid enough to fall for Stephanie's lies. But I also knew one thing for certain. Stephanie was the real mastermind. Eric was just a pawn. And pawns were always the ones who got sacrificed first. I let out a slow breath, pressing my fingers to my temples. "Celestia?" Tyler's voice pulled me back. "I'm going to that party," I said, already standing up and grabbing my coat. Tyler sputtered. "Wait, what?" "That's a terrible idea. If he sees you, he'll know something's up." "Exactly," I murmured. I took the elevator down to the parking garage, my heels clicking against the concrete as I moved quickly toward my car. The truth was, I wasn't entirely sure what I was about to do, but I knew I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. 15 minutes later, I stepped out of my car in front of the private club, handing my keys to the valet as I smoothed out my dress. The building was old, elegant, one of those places that catered to men like Eric, who measured their worth by how exclusive their memberships were. I walked through the doors like I belonged there, flashing a small smile at the hostess as I made my way toward the main event. The room was packed, filled with men in tailored suits and women draped in diamonds, the air thick with the scent of whiskey and expensive cologne. Servers weaved through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvre. while conversations buzzed around me talk of investments, of wealth, of promises that were nothing more than smoke and mirrors. And then I saw him. Eric stood near the bar, a glass of bourbon in hand, laughing at something one of his colleagues had said. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man who truly believed he was on the verge of something great. And standing beside him, her arm wrapped around his, was Stephanie. She was glowing, dressed in a sleek black gown, her makeup flawless, her eyes scanning the room with the sharpness of a woman who knew she had already won. Except she hadn't. Not yet. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing server and took a slow sip, watching them, waiting. And then, as if sensing my presence, Stephanie's gaze met mine. For the briefest second, something flickered across her face. Surprise? Annoyance? It was gone before I could fully read it, replaced with an easy, practiced smile as she leaned into Eric, whispering something in his ear. His head snapped up. The second he saw me, the smugness on his face vanished. I took my time making my way toward them, savoring the tension crackling in the air. When I finally reached them, I smiled sweetly. "Eric?" I said, tilting my head. What a surprise. He cleared his throat, straightening his posture. "Celestia, what the hell are you doing here?" Stephanie let out a soft, airy laugh, placing a hand on Eric's chest. "Oh, don't be rude, darling. We should be welcoming Celestia after all. This is a night for big opportunities." I turned my attention to her, my smile never faltering. "Big opportunities," I echoed. "Yes, I've been hearing a lot about those." She held my gaze, and for the first time, I saw it the tiniest flicker of doubt. "Good." I swirled my champagne in my glass, glancing at the crowd around us. "So, how much have we raised so far?" I asked, my tone light, conversational. I heard it was somewhere around 5 million. Eric's jaw clenched. Stephanie's nails dug into his arm. Neither of them answered. I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. "You know, it's funny. I was just talking to a friend of mine, an investigator, actually. He was telling me about this crazy story. About a woman who used to work in tech, who pretended to have inside knowledge about AI investments. You wouldn't believe the mess she left behind." Stephanie's hand tightened around her clutch, her knuckles turning white. I met her gaze, my smile widening. "Anyway," I said, taking a step closer, lowering my voice just enough for only her to hear. "I just wanted to wish you safe travels." Her breath hitched, and for the first time that night, she looked afraid. Stephanie's lips barely parted, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the sharp inhale she tried to disguise as composure. She had built her world on confidence, on making people believe she was untouchable. But now, standing in front of me, she was starting to realize she had underestimated the one person she should have feared. Eric still looked thrown, his fingers tightening around his glass, his eyes darting between me and Stephanie like he was piecing together a puzzle too late. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I took another sip of my champagne, tilting my head slightly. "You seem tense," I mused, watching the way Stephanie's fingers curled tighter around her clutch. "Nervous about something?" She forced a small laugh, but it was stiff, unnatural. "Of course not," she said smoothly, her voice like honey laced with poison. "Why would I be nervous?" I smiled. "I don't know. Maybe because your whole house of cards is about to come crashing down." The flicker of panic in her eyes was delicious. Eric finally found his voice, his expression twisting in confusion and frustration. "Celestia, what the hell is this?" I turned to him, feigning innocence. "Oh, Eric," I sighed. "I thought you were smarter than this." I let my gaze flick towards Stephanie. "But I guess that's always been your problem, hasn't it? You've never been able to tell the difference between a real opportunity and a well-dressed scam." His jaw tightened, his face reddening. "You're just jealous," he spat. "You're bitter because I moved on." I let out a short, amused laugh. "Moved on?" I repeated, shaking my head. "You think this is about us?" "Eric, I couldn't care less about who you sleep with. This is about the fact that you've been duped. Played." Scammed out of every last cent, because you were too blinded by greed to see what was right in front of you. His brows furrowed, but before he could respond, Stephanie's fingers dug into his arm. "Let's not do this here," she whispered urgently, but her voice had lost its earlier smoothness. She was unraveling, and she knew it. I set my empty champagne glass down on the tray of a passing server and took a step closer, lowering my voice just enough so only they could hear me. "Do you want to know the best part?" I said, watching Stephanie's throat bob as she swallowed hard. "She was never planning on taking you with her." Eric flinched like I had slapped him. I turned my full attention to Stephanie now, my voice soft but lethal. "I know about Dubai. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the one-way plane ticket. And I know that as soon as that money finishes moving, you're gone." For the first time, she had no words. Eric, however, was starting to piece it together, his expression shifting from confusion to something darker, something angrier. "What is she talking about?" he demanded, turning to Stephanie. Stephanie lifted her chin, her mask of calm cracking at the edges. "She's trying to get in your head, Eric," she said, forcing a laugh. But it wasn't convincing anymore. "She's always been desperate for attention. Don't." I cut in, my voice sharp, my patience thin. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you aren't exactly what you are." She opened her mouth again, but I wasn't done. "You think you're so smart," I continued, my voice quieter now, sharper. "But you made one mistake." I tilted my head, watching the panic creep into her expression. "You underestimated me." Stephanie's hand tightened around Eric's arm again, but this time, he pulled away. "You were leaving?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "Without me?" The fear in her eyes was real now. "Eric." But he had already stepped back. "Are you serious?" His voice rose, drawing the attention of the people around us. Whispers started, the energy in the room shifting. "You used me?" Her panic deepened. "No, baby. It's not like that." He let out a hollow laugh, running a hand through his hair. "Jesus Christ." He turned away, shaking his head. "I put everything into this. Everything. And then, just like that, the dam broke." The whispers became murmurs, then voices, then shouts. A man from across the room, one of Eric's investors, if I had to guess, stepped forward, his face dark with suspicion. "What the hell is going on?" Eric didn't answer. He was still staring at Stephanie, betrayal and realization colliding in his eyes. Another investor stepped forward. "Where's our money, Eric?" The tension in the room exploded. More voices joined in. People began pulling out their phones, scrolling furiously, murmuring to each other. I saw one man shake his head violently, his face going pale as he read something on his screen. The story was breaking, maybe not in the news yet, but in the spaces that mattered. The word was spreading. Stephanie turned to me then, her expression wild, unhinged. "You did this," she hissed. I just smiled. "No, Stephanie, you did." And then, just as I predicted, she ran. She shoved past Eric, past the stunned investors, heading straight for the exit. But she wasn't fast enough. Security had already been called, and within moments, 2 guards intercepted her near the doors. She struggled, she argued, but she was out of moves. Checkmate. Eric was still standing in the middle of the chaos, his hands running over his face, his mind finally catching up to reality. I almost wanted to say something, to tell him this was the moment his choices had led him to. But instead, I turned on my heel and walked out the door, leaving him to deal with the mess he had helped create. The night air was crisp as I stepped out of the private club, the distant hum of the city filling the silence that stretched around me. Behind those heavy oak doors, chaos was unraveling, investors demanding answers, security dragging Stephanie out like the con artist she was, and Eric. Eric standing frozen in the wreckage of everything he had built on greed and arrogance. But out here, it was quiet. The world kept moving. And I was done. I walked down the marble steps, my heels clicking with each step, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I should have felt victorious. After all, I had just watched everything fall apart exactly the way I knew it would. I had exposed Stephanie, shattered Eric's delusions, and left behind a mess that neither of them would ever recover from. But instead of relief, there was something else curling in my chest, a weight, heavy and cold, pressing down on me. This wasn't just some game where I got to walk away, dusting off my hands. There were real people who had lost everything. People who had trusted Eric. People who had trusted Stephanie. And while I had no sympathy for them, the investors who had blindly bought into their fantasy, there were still innocent people tangled in the wreckage. Employees who had no idea their futures had been gambled away. Families who were about to wake up to the harsh reality that their savings were gone. And for what? Because Eric had wanted to feel powerful. Because Stephanie had wanted more. I reached my car, pressing the key fob absent-mindedly as I opened the door, slipping inside. The second I shut it, the silence became deafening. I rested my hands on the steering wheel, my pulse still unsteady, my thoughts still spinning. My phone vibrated on the passenger seat. I exhaled slowly before picking it up. Tyler's name flashed across the screen. "Tell me," I said, skipping the pleasantries as I answered. "You made the news," he said, his voice laced with something between awe and disbelief. "Or, well, Eric did." I closed my eyes, exhaling through my nose. "Already?" "Yeah," he muttered. "There's a video circulating. Someone recorded the whole thing. Investors cornering him, Stephanie getting dragged out, security stepping in when people started getting aggressive. It's bad, Celestia. I should have been surprised, but I wasn't. People loved a downfall, especially one that involved money, greed, and betrayal. Eric had played the part of a powerful businessman for years, convincing everyone he was untouchable. Now, he was nothing more than a cautionary tale, a headline waiting to be devoured by the public. "What about Stephanie?" I asked. Tyler hesitated. "She was arrested. Security handed her over to the authorities." He paused. "It turns out she had outstanding fraud charges from 2 states before she even met you." My eyes snapped open. "Excuse me?" "Yeah," he said, letting out a breath. "Apparently she pulled a similar scam years ago. Used a different name, different city, but the same playbook. She took a plea deal back then, did some probation time, and vanished. No one ever thought she'd resurface. Jesus. It suddenly made sense why she had been so damn good at this. She had experience. And Eric, in his arrogance, had never questioned it. I ran a hand through my hair, letting that sink in. "She's looking at serious time," Tyler continued. "And Eric? He's about to have a different kind of problem." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "His investors," he said. "They're furious. And some of them aren't just angry, they're out for blood." A chill ran down my spine. Eric had conned the wrong kind of people. It wasn't just retired businessmen or first-time investors. Some of them were dangerous. People who weren't going to wait for lawsuits or investigations to get their money back. For the first time that night, I felt something unexpected. Pity. Because Eric? He was about to realize that Stephanie wasn't the worst thing that had ever happened to him. I drummed my fingers against the steering wheel, my mind racing. "What's he doing now?" "He left the club," Tyler said. "Drove off as soon as security let him go. No one knows where he went, but let's just say he looked like a man who just realized his entire life was over." I let that sit between us for a moment. I had spent months planning this, ensuring that when the moment came, Eric would feel everything he had made me feel. The betrayal, the humiliation, the loss. And I had succeeded. But instead of satisfaction, all I felt was emptiness. Because the truth was, I had already won long before tonight. The moment I signed those acquisition papers, securing my 7-figure future, I had won. The moment I chose to walk away from him, from his condescension, from his lies, from his self-destruction, I had won. Everything after that, it had just been the fallout. I rubbed my temples, suddenly feeling exhausted. Keep an eye on him, I said. Let me know if anything happens. Tyler sighed. You still care, don't you? I let out a hollow laugh. No, I said, and it wasn't a lie. I just want to see how this ends. We hung up, and I sat there for a long moment, staring out at the quiet street. The city lights blurred through the windshield, smudging like paint against the night sky. Tomorrow, the headlines would be everywhere. Tomorrow, Eric would wake up with nothing. Tomorrow, the world would keep turning. And I would move forward. Because unlike him, I had built something real. And real things? They didn't crumble overnight. I barely slept that night. Not because I was worried, no, that wasn't it. It was the aftermath. The sheer weight of it all settling over me like a thick, suffocating fog. I had won. That much was clear. But victories like this didn't come clean. They came jagged, with sharp edges and loose ends, with the undeniable reality that even when you destroy the people who tried to destroy you, there are always consequences. By morning, the fallout was already in motion. The headlines were brutal, and they were everywhere. Real estate mogul, caught in multi-million-dollar investment scam fraud, lies, and a failed escape. Inside the collapse of the Harrison Fund. Ex-tech assistant arrested in connection to massive Ponzi scheme. I sat at my kitchen table, my coffee growing cold beside me as I scrolled through article after article. There were already rumors that the second FBI were getting involved, that Eric's assets were being frozen, that lawsuits were being filed at a rapid pace. Investors were demanding blood. Some had already gathered outside his office downtown, waving signs, shouting threats. I took a slow breath and set my phone down. I should have felt relief, but instead all I felt was an eerie kind of stillness, like the storm had passed, but the wreckage was still settling. And then my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen. Tyler, tell me, I said as soon as I picked up. You're not going to believe this, he said, his voice carrying something between shock and grim amusement. Eric just tried to run. I blinked. What? He went to the airport. Security flagged him the second he tried to board a flight to Mexico. He was detained at customs. Tyler hesitated, then let out a breath. Celestia. He looked like a wreck. He was crying. Like, full-on breakdown in front of everyone. I let that sink in. Eric had actually thought he could escape this. That he could pull the same stunt Stephanie had tried and disappear before the consequences caught up to him. But Eric? He was too late. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady sound of my own breathing. It was done. Really done. What happens now? I asked. Tyler sighed. Well, he's out on bail at least for now, but his accounts are frozen. Every investor he scammed is coming for him. And with Stephanie flipping on him, his chances of avoiding prison are. He let out a low whistle. Not great, Stephanie. Of course. I should have known. She was a survivor. A snake, but a smart one. She wouldn't go down with the ship if she could claw her way out. She cut a deal? I asked. Looks like it, Tyler confirmed. Word is, she's giving them everything: emails, bank records, even recordings of their private conversations. She's trying to pin the worst of it on him. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. Stephanie was ruthless, but I had to admit, she played the game well. She knew Eric was the bigger fish, the easier target. If sacrificing him meant saving herself, she'd do it without a second thought. I rubbed my temples, exhaustion creeping in. How long do you think he has before he's arrested again? Hard to say. Days? Maybe weeks? But he's done, Celestia. He'll never recover from this. I nodded, even though Tyler couldn't see me. We both knew what happened to men like Eric. They didn't just lose. They disappeared. I hung up a few minutes later, then stood and walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. It felt different today. Or maybe I felt different. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next betrayal, the next dismissal, the next moment where someone tried to tell me I wasn't enough. Eric had been my greatest mistake, but now he was nothing more than a cautionary tale. And I had an empire to build. I watched the city skyline from my office window, the golden glow of the setting sun stretching long shadows across the streets below. It had been weeks since the collapse, since Eric's empire had crumbled to dust, since Stephanie had been dragged away in handcuffs, since the world had finally seen them for what they really were. The headlines had shifted, as they always did, moving on to the next scandal, the next downfall, the next big name to fall from grace. But in my world, the aftermath was still unfolding. Eric had been arrested again. The moment the court saw the extent of the fraud, the scale of the destruction he had caused, they revoked his bail. His investors had turned against him completely, filing lawsuits that would bury him under financial ruin, even if he somehow avoided a prison sentence. Stephanie, true to form, had made her move, first cutting a deal, handing over evidence, painting herself as just another victim of Eric's reckless ambition. It wouldn't save her completely, but it would soften the blow. She'd still do time, but not nearly as much as she deserved. And me? I had walked away unscathed, victorious, free. Yet, as I stood there, staring at the city I had fought so hard to thrive in, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not regret, not guilt. Something quieter? Closure. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't bracing for the next betrayal. I wasn't waiting for the moment where someone tried to diminish me, to steal what I built, to make me feel small. I had won, and not just in the way people thought. It wasn't the money. It was the fact that I had built something real. Unlike Eric, I hadn't schemed my way to success. I hadn't tricked people into believing in a lie. I had spent years grinding, working, creating something that lasted. And now I was exactly where I was meant to be. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. "Come in," I called, turning as Tyler stepped inside. He held up his phone, his expression somewhere between amusement and disbelief. "Guess what?" he said, handing it to me. I took the phone, glancing at the screen. My brows lifted as I read the article. Former real estate mogul Eric Harrison sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. 15 years. I let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of it settle over me. It wasn't surprising. The sheer magnitude of the fraud had guaranteed that he wouldn't walk away with a slap on the wrist. The court had made an example out of him, using his case to send a message to every other fraudster who thought they could con their way to wealth. I handed the phone back to Tyler. 15 years? I murmured. "That's longer than our marriage lasted," Tyler snorted. Karma's got a sense of humor. I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. I thought about Eric, about the man he used to be, the man I had once loved, the man who had once promised me the world before he realized he only wanted it for himself. He had been so certain he would come out on top, so convinced that he was smarter than everyone else. And now he was just another disgraced businessman in an orange jumpsuit. Another cautionary tale for the world to gawk at. I should have felt satisfaction, but the truth was, I had stopped caring about Eric the moment I signed those divorce papers. He had been a lesson, not a loss. I turned back to the window, watching the city shift and move, the hum of life continuing without him. "So, what now?" Tyler asked, crossing his arms. I smiled, the answer already settled deep in my bones. "Now?" I said, turning to him. "I build." Because while Eric had spent his time chasing shortcuts, I had been laying a foundation. And unlike him, I wasn't going to waste it. And just like that, it was over. Stephanie ran. Eric was left to face millions in lawsuits, criminal charges, and a ruined reputation. The man who thought I was worthless now had nothing, while I walked away with wealth, freedom, and a company worth more than he ever dreamed of. But let this be a lesson: real success isn't built on lies. It's built on hard work, strategy, and knowing exactly when to walk away. So tell me, Have you ever watched someone self-destruct because of their own greed? Let me know in the comments. And if you loved this story, hit that like button and follow for more. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: real success isn't built on shortcuts, schemes, or empty promises. It's built on resilience, hard work, and the ability to walk away from people who don't see your worth. Eric chased fast money, believing that deception was a strategy. Stephanie played the game, thinking she could always outrun the consequences. But in the end, they both lost. The lesson: greed collapses, lies unravel, and those who build something real, something honest, will always outlast those who try to steal their way to the top. Do the work, protect what's yours, and never let anyone diminish you.